So I do want to do something a little different today, just because we've covered Docker Compose enough that I think going through what's in here will be very tedious and kind of boring, right? So what we have here today, um, a Docker review that really you can read through on your own. None of this is new. A lot of it is background information to Docker, Kubernetes, how they all fit into a pipeline, and basically a cheat sheet of commands that you'll already have been running. I know you've run some of these in previous assessments. So that'll be essentially something you could read through on your own. And this is a very short README as well that talks about port mapping. And we're essentially already going to be doing this. We've already been doing it. You've seen it in the Docker files or Docker Compose files, and you've been using it when you run your Docker commands. So again, this one will just be more of a README. Actually, we'll also go through this part, Docker Hub, and um, we'll push images. We'll push and pull images to just to have that experience. But the bulk of it, the Docker Compose stuff, I want to try and make this a little more interactive. So I think what we could do is we can set up our terminals. We'll write a Docker Compose file together, and we're going to create basically the three services that you're going to need for the assessment for a full stack application. That's going to be a front end service like this web here, a back end service, and a database. So if you don't have Docker Compose set up already, go ahead and get that installed on your local machine. And we'll run through a bit of this, so that should give you a few minutes to get set up. And then I'm gonna call on a few folks to share their screens.
Is there a link to set it up, or did we set it up in a previous class? I forget.
Yeah, I forget too. I think yeah, I don't remember if it was. I mean I would assume that if Chandra has gone over it for that alt stack, and I've shown it a few times for the GitHub Actions pipelines. Some of you may have figured out how to install it already, but right, I don't think we've given you a little box like this that tells you how to install it. So today's lesson, week 17, day one.
Can you
Try,
send me for this repo, Julius, please?
what's that?
Can you send us the link?
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll paste this in the Zoom chat. Okay, so let's get that set up. And
So, just for clarification, this is an installation onto our system through like Linux. It's not going to a URL and settings and installing a package or anything like that, right?
it's going to grab
Not
the
like a dbeaver, is what I'm trying to say.
right DB. Yeah, no, it's not like that. No.
So just those three commands.
Yeah, this should be enough. It's basically gonna grab the official Docker Compose um, installation file. It changes the permissions on it so you can run it from your terminal, and then let me. I should already have it installed. I wonder what will show up if I run this. So let me pull up my terminal. Oh. Ooh. Yeah, that didn't work for me. Let's see. If you have Docker Desktop, you shouldn't have to install it separately, I think, actually.
Yeah, I have Docker desktop and I tried the dash dash dot version
Hmm.
and looks like I have already.
Okay, if you try Docker Compose help, does it show anything?
Let me see.
Yeah, if you see this, then you're good. You'll be able to run Docker Compose. So if you see Docker Compose with a bunch of options, you run Docker Compose help.
Yep.
Okay, then yeah, we're good. Now let me double check this. I'm reading through this now and it looks really weird to me that it's grabbing a binary, it's saving it, it's changing permission, and then there's not actually even an install file or a command. So I don't know why that's there. Oh, let's talk through the format. We've seen it a few times already. Basically, you're listing out services, right? Just a bunch of different services. In older versions of Docker V1 specifically, first off, you would have to use Docker Compose in version 1, right? And if we do a Docker, oh wow, it doesn't even show the old instructions anymore. Docker Compose V1 is deprecated. So that's why you're able to run Docker Compose commands now with the space, because that's Docker Compose V2. And with Docker Compose V2, version is deprecated. So sometimes you'll see at the top of a Docker Compose file a version. You no longer need that. Just start with services. That's essentially the only thing you're going to need, because everything you write inside your Docker Compose is going to be inside of that, right? And well, actually, I'll take that back. You could also write configurations that will be shared with these services. So things like environment variables and other settings that you want to apply for all of them. And if we look at, let me look for an example here. Let's say maybe one of the files that we've been running these past few weeks, kind of blanking on the name. How's this one look? Oh no, that's today's example. If we look at, my folder naming skills are the worst. They don't make sense, not even to me. So Fab3 demo. I think this has a Docker Compose, right? If we look at the Docker Compose file that we've been using, shoot, this one doesn't either. No shared environment variables here. Let me look at one more. Okay, not that one either. Anyway, yes, we're primarily going to be working with configuring services under services, and we can set individual things like environment variables, memory limits, the image that's going to be used by each service, details like the networks and the volumes that they use. We see some port mapping, and we can even utilize some actions, not really called actions. I'm blanking on what what else to call this right now, but here, for example, this is a Postgres service that we're defining. And if we look down at Flask API, we're writing this to depend on that database. Basically, we're telling Docker Compose, hey, don't start up Flask API until A, this DB service is up and running, and B, it passes its health checks. So we pass in, or we specify some commands that we want to be run. They'll run at 10-second intervals. And if they time out for longer than 5 seconds, it will retry. If it hits 5 retries, then it fails. It returns a failure for the health check results. And if it passes, then we will start building the next service. We can even set the condition for what we want it to do, right? So that is a Docker Compose file in a nutshell. So what else can we do? Here we see an example for Nginx. You see that version that's no longer in use, so you don't need to include that. It doesn't hurt either. It's just going to be ignored basically if it's in there. We're using Nginx. We're finding some ports. Can anyone tell me why we're using ports 8080 and 80?
HTTPS, and then is 8080 SQL, maybe?
Your port mapping.
Mhm. And close, it's actually HTTP, not HTTPS. HTTPS is 443. And specifically, 80 on the right is for the container, and 8080 on the left is for your host machine. And is there really a reason why we use 8080? Not really. It's not like a default port used by anything, right? I don't know, it's just used for things like Nginx, because port 80 is already going to be utilized by your local machine, right? When you are in your browser and you're visiting any website, by default, it's going to be using port 80. Yeah, Lamar?
As far as it's concerned for this Docker file, this is port mapping, right? Like one port inside the Docker container to the port you want to connect to outside of it, right?
Yes. So, right. Yeah, inside of our container, Nginx will be listening for activity on port 80. So if it gets any activity from port 80, then it's going to do its thing, right? It's going to serve the web application. And it gets that activity from our local machine, route 8080, right? So if we wanted to see an app that we were running in a container, we would type, like whatever it is, localhost, blah, blah, blah. But instead of 80, which is essentially what's already being used by your browser for anything you connect to via HTTP, we would set 8080 because it's not used, it's an unused port. And that will read as port 80 inside of the container. So once you're actually, deploying multi-container applications and you're working with this port mapping over and over and over again, it'll feel a lot easier. And what happened to my VS Code? If we look at some of these other examples, we see that the default port for Postgres is 5432. So on the left, you could use 5432 as well. But if you have Postgres running in the background already, you might run into a conflict, right? Because that port's already being used. So we just change it to something else, something kind of, it's almost arbitrary because as long as it's not being used, it's fair game, right? So general rule of thumb, you could leave the port inside of the container to whatever it normally uses, its default value. And on the left is the port that you're going to use to try and access that, right? So if we wanted to hit up our Postgres database from outside of the container, we would use 5454 and it will appear as 5432 inside the container. Same with Flask. We are essentially binding port 8000 to 8000. In this case, it's okay to use that default value because you're likely not running a Flask application on your local machine already, right? And if you are, then you would change this left side port number. Okay. That about does it for our general overview of a Docker Compose. So let's actually go ahead and write a Docker Compose file. And let's start with, well, first off, do we have any volunteers?
What do you want us to show?
Yeah, share your screen and we'll write a compose file, a fresh compose file.
I'll do it. Sure.
Right on. All right, Jeremy, take it away.
Now start sharing screen while other participate. Oh, you just. All right, so we're starting a new Docker Compose file.
Yep. So, yeah. Okay. Let's start by defining what's the very first thing we do?
It's either service or version,
Yes.
depending on what you're doing, right?
Yeah. One.
Would this be a version or service first?
I would say services. Because unless you're using an older version of Docker Compose for whatever reason, that version's going to be ignored.
Okay.
Okay. And so, yeah, let's start. Looks like we're going to start with a front-end application. And let's make this, web is fine for the name. Let's make this an Nginx service. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and in our same directory, in your terminal, let's make a new folder for your web service.
Okay.
Oh, and do it from whatever directory your compose file is in. Okay, cool.
So you want the directory underneath the compose file or in the same directory as the compose file?
Exactly, in the same directory. Okay. So, oh, no. You could leave the compose file in the root. Basically, this is a multi-stage application, right? So your compose file, which will compose all of the different applications, can stay in the root of your project directory. And that's going to be Docker_compose1. And then all the subdirectories inside of that are going to be your different containers. Like you'll have a folder for your backend API. You'll have one for your front end server. You'll have one for anything else that you need. Maybe not a database, but that's like your general workflow, right?
Okay.
So let's make a folder for your web service.
In practice or in my subdirectory? All the folders are going to be in here?
No, it's good. They're all going to be inside of Docker_compose1.
Okay.
Just for simplicity's sake. And once you're more comfortable with Docker Compose, you can get as crazy as you want with your.
You said services, web services?
Yeah, anything you want to name it, web service, web services, whatever. Okay, and let's make this an Nginx application. So first, let's create a Docker file.
Tested my knowledge. I don't remember. It's the this one.
Yeah.
Forget what the dot is.
You could leave it just like that. Yeah. Okay. So this one's going to be super simple. We're going to use Nginx. So let's do from, let's see. And how can you look up images?
Curl.
Well, if you have the,
Line.
you want, yes. So inside of your terminal, yeah, not your code editor, but your terminal, let's do a Docker search Nginx. And this allows you to search the official Docker hub repositories for images to use. And we probably want to use the official Nginx image. So let's scroll all the way to the top and see if that shows up. Yeah. So you just need the name. You could do from Nginx. And that should be good. Work directory, you could just do the directory you're in. So yes, you could either hard code the full path or you could just pass in a symbol.
That or something.
The period symbol is fine. Like that'll basically say this directory that the Docker file is in is going to be the work directory. And yes, we're probably going to want to copy a file over. So we can do just the very simple copy. For now, copy dot and then dot again. We'll change it in a sec once we have a better idea of where we want to do this. We're not going to need expose. And we might not even need command right now. So let's leave it like that. Cool. And let's also look at some Nginx documentation because we basically want to know how to configure our Nginx, right? So let me look for this link. And I'll paste it inside of the Zoom chat. Okay. It's not the most user-friendly documentation, but it has enough to let us know the basics of how it works. So what we want to look for here is basically instructions on like how to get started. And it's already throwing a lot of code examples at us, right? We're just
Yep.
going to be serving some static content. So we don't need anything too fancy. Let's start with that block right there where it says HTTP and server. Let's copy paste that.
Into a new file.
Yes, actually. And does the README tell you what file to make?
Which one are we on? Docker? Not Docker.
Now let's scroll all the way back up to the top of the documentation. In the Nginx docs. Okay. The way Nginx and its modules work is determined in the configuration file. So by default, the configuration file is named nginx.conf, and it's placed in that directory. And so it's also showing some alternative locations. And it's showing some commands. Let's just go ahead and name our file nginx.conf. And there we could paste that okay. So it looks like it's saved. One thing I want to point out is you're probably going to want this inside of your web service or web services directory, whatever you named it, right? Because this Docker file and this Nginx configuration file, these are for your web service app.
Okay.
Same with that Docker file. Because you're going to have multiple Docker files, all right? You're going to have one for basically every part of your multi-container application, okay? So far, this is looking good. Let's see if we can see anywhere. Yes, Lamar.
Julius, can you repeat what you just said to Jeremy? You were a little bit muffled.
Sorry. What
As
part?
far as what part? Oh, pretty much all of it, but specifically, I was trying to understand what you were referring to when you said you need to make sure you're naming X file this name because it's mentioned in your Docker Compose as a service. It has to have a matching name. Is
Oh,
that what you said?
yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So can you restate that part?
Yeah,
Thanks.
sure. Jeremy, if you go back to your compose file, I think you called it practice.yaml. So yes, those should match. That should match with a folder. Actually, no, it doesn't need to match. It should be, it's good practice to have it match. It's not absolutely critical because you could specify the folder path. And we'll see that later when we write out the build context. But was that what you missed, Lamar, or
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
okay. Okay. And the files that you're putting inside of that directory are basically files for that part of the application because your Docker Compose is simply a tool for building a multi-container application, right? It helps you compose multiple Docker files all at once. And this is pretty handy when you're essentially almost always working with some kind of tech stack, right? You're never really just working with one framework or anything because applications are a little more complicated than that. You're working with multiple pieces. You'll have a back end to serve your API, a database to store your data, a front end to serve that content, and anything else that you might want, right? Like the Elasticsearch, the Logstash, Kibana, pgadmin tools that developers can use while maintaining the application, tools that are team friendly. pgadmin, for example, is useful because it gives a team of engineers access to the database with a friendly UI, right? So that's why we want to be mindful of how we organize the hierarchy inside of a Docker Compose directory. You're going to be working with multiple parts of an app. You don't want to get lost. You don't want to get confused. You don't want your Docker files to get mixed up, right? So that's generally best practice for writing compose files. Just um, same best practices basically with programming in general, right? Like when you're writing your code, when you're writing file names and method names, class names, make them as understandable as possible. Don't try to confuse your team. Make it as intuitive as possible. Okay. So far we've got a web service. It's got a Docker file and an nginx configuration. Let's do a few more things inside of that configuration file, and let's just kind of plays through it. So inside of that server block, do let's add a listen. Yeah, so hit enter, type listen, 80 and semicolon. So this is basically saying our server for HTTP requests is going to be listening through port 80. Let's now also hit enter a few more times and let's set a location, just kind of like how you see inside that next part of the documentation. And then the curly brackets. Okay. This is good for now. We're probably going to change it later on, but for now we have like placeholders for some of our stuff. Let's go back to our Docker file and let's make sure that we, this is good for now too. Like we're basically copying everything inside of the web services directory into the work directory inside of the container, right? So this should be okay. Now you will have to change that path later on, but I don't want to spend the whole day on Nginx, so let's leave that for now. Okay, let's make our next service and let's do a Flask API app.
I don't know how to put that. What file do I need? Just PY.
Yeah. So let's start there. Um, you could just look up like some very simple Flask boilerplate if you want. There's also plenty of examples inside of the curriculum repo. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, cool. So that's good. What else? What's next? Well, yeah, exactly. What is next? What else do we need for our Flask application?
Uh, Apache. No. Oh yeah, because we're using Linux.
Yeah, let's keep it simple. Like, what do we need to get this application to run?
A backend.
The requirements.
Yes, requirements, right?
Yes.
So let's set up some requirements. And the easiest way to do this instead of like making the file itself is to go ahead and install the things that you need, right? So inside of your Flask app directory, you can set up a virtual environment.
Then open then such
I think it's source.
precipage.
I thought it was source.
Not quite.
Yeah, I feel like there was a step. There's one step missing.
Yes,
Before this.
there's a step before that.
Somewhere. There we go.
You know what that dash M means?
Make. No, I don't.
Hey, that's not a bad guess, honestly.
That was my guess. Make it.
It stands
it
for
so.
module, and I mean, make actually makes a lot of sense, right? It's basically making a venv directory using the venv module. Whatever you need to help you remember it, right? That should help you remember the command.
Do we need to activate it?
Yes, once you make it, go ahead and activate it. And then we'll do our, like our pip install, pip upgrade install. I can never memorize that command.
Pip install requirements. I know that, but we don't have requirements.
Right, not yet. You want to upgrade your pip package manager, and then we'll install Flask.
Yes.
Not quite actually, because all of that apt is a package manager for your Ubuntu operating system, right?
Yeah.
It's specifically a Python package manager. So your virtual environment doesn't care about any of those files. They're not being installed.
Install pip.
Let's see. Where is that? You should already have pip installed. We're looking for the upgrade update. And so it should be pip install dash dash upgrade. Pip. Cool. Now we can install Flask. Let's do a pip install Flask, and that should be enough to make our requirements for now. Okay. And once you've installed that, you could do a pip freeze redirect the right caret and requirements.txt.
Freeze. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. What does that do?
Basically, all of the requirements installed in your virtual environment are going to be stored inside of requirements.txt. Cool. All right, so now we've got two services set up. Well, actually, we haven't written the service block for the Flask app yet, right? We've only set up the Flask app. So let's go back to our Docker Compose. Let's write a block for, oh, we got to finish the web services block too. So let's finish the web services block. Cool. Okay, for build, there's a few different ways to do this. Usually for Docker Compose, it's best to use context. So instead of passing in a single value, we're going to hit enter and we're going to pass in two values. So do an indent and type context, colon, and the directory for your web services app. So that should be web_services.
The whole like
No, just do a relative path. Do it using period / web_services.
both work, right?
Yeah, both work.
Okay.
And then the next line should be Docker file, : and the name of your Docker file. Cool. Okay. And go
Would
ahead.
it be okay, because it's under here. Does this need to be indented then again or no?
Oh, no. They should be in the same indentation. So that's good. That looks good. Let's go ahead and add some ports. So that looks like the pattern that you generally be using in the AWS when setting a security group, right?
Mhm.
Nginx isn't going to need all of that. Nginx only cares about serving the front end, right? Its role is only that. So it really only needs port 80.
Like that.
Yeah, exactly. And the rest we can hold off on because you'll be using those with your other services. And yes, if we were enabling HTTPS, then you would use 443, but we're not doing that. So should be good. If you don't specify a volume, Docker will know to just use the default volume. So if you go to your
Can we just
terminal,
remove it?
sorry, what was that page?
I said, can we just remove it or do we still need it?
Sorry, one more time.
Can we just remove it or do we still need it there?
Yeah, you can remove it. You can leave it out completely, and it will just use a default volume. And if you go into your terminal right now, Jeremy, and type Docker volume list, do one with a -a. Oh, I guess not. I guess you don't have any Docker volumes. It would list all of the Docker volumes on your machine if you had any. So it's
So,
optional.
quick question about that. So if it does, because I have like a bunch,
Mhm.
what would you do with that information?
Well, if you're trying to save up space, that could let you know what volumes you have, and you could read through them and see which ones are expendable. If you're maybe going back to an old project and you don't remember what volumes to look in, you could use that volume list to reference what volumes you have, and that might help you find whatever you're trying to look for.
But the volume names are like these random numbers and characters. How would you know which one to which?
Yeah, that one's a little more complex. So yeah, you would have to start using more options when you're passing in these arguments to kind of like um, trace where that volume might be tied to. But a lot of times too, like if it's just a large hash, it might just be a volume that you don't need. Like maybe you were running Docker Compose up multiple times. It was just creating like a new volume each time. In that case, you could just use a command like Docker volume prune to remove all volumes that aren't being used by one of your images or containers.
Okay, yeah, good one. Well, how do I get rid of all of these? I'm
Yeah,
sure I don't need any of them.
yeah, Docker volume prune.
Oh, I reclaimed 1.3 gigabytes of space.
Nice. Yeah, Docker prune is super handy. It works with like basically every part of Docker. You could use prune on containers, on images, on volumes, on networks. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's up to you, Jeremy, if you want to have a volume or not. Basically, if you do, then there's two ways to do that. One, you could pass in on the left side the volume name, or you can map the directory to a directory inside of the container.
Is it easier to have a volume or easier not to have a volume? Or to make it default?
Oh yeah, probably easier not to. Unless you have a specific use for one, then um yeah, don't have one. I think in general, the less you add from the get-go, like the leaner it is, the easier it's going to be to work with and to iterate. And it's only when you need things should you actually include them. Like later on, when we get deeper into the compose file, I'll want to show you how it can be very handy, especially in a React application, to map your source directory, which is what the application is built from, to the source directory inside of the container, because that way you'll be able to see updates live inside of the container that you're making locally. But we're not doing that right now. We don't have a React app to do that with right now. So let's hold off on that. Let's save that for another day. So let's get rid of volumes
Okay.
and let's add another service because I think this one looks good. Okay, you only need to define services once, and basically every service now can be in the same indent as your first one, web services.
Okay, if it's going to that directory. Or the same, okay, yeah, I understand.
So now let's do one for Flask. Okay, same thing. Let's set a build and a context.
You
Okay.
put the Python file in there?
No, we're gonna want to the build is for the Docker file. So you want to point to the Docker file. And it looks like we don't have one yet, so we're gonna have to make one. Now our Flask Docker file actually isn't going to be looking for a Flask image. We're going to look for Python. We're going to need something a little more robust than Nginx because Flask is going to require a bit more configuration. So let's just pull a Python image. So let's do from Python colon, and let's use, I don't know, version 3.12. Yeah, you don't need the V. And at the end, you could type dash alpine dot, let's do 3.21, or yeah, any of those versions. So when you see these, I don't know, subnames or labels associated with these different images, they're basically different distributions. And Alpine is known as being a lightweight distribution. This way, when you run build, it's going to be faster because it's not going to have as much of the pre-installed packages that the official Python image might have, right? So it's going to speed up development and also save you on file size and things like that. So generally good to use these kind of images when you're in development mode and maybe even in production if it suffices for your use case. Okay, now let's set the work directory to, I guess this should be fine for now too. Things like the work directory, you're really going to start to change once you're actually ready to start running your Docker build and interact with your application. So there's going to be some tweaking and fine tuning later on because I don't know exactly what you want to use for your work directory. My general practice is I'll set the work directory to a directory name that makes sense. Like in my case, in my Docker file. Looks like I called mine Flask API, but again, that's like user preference, right? So we could leave that work directory as is for now. The next thing we're going to want to do is set some commands because this one's going to be a little more complicated than Nginx. So let's go ahead and let's first run. Actually, let's not do this. This is not the best example. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right thing here. I don't want to like waste time doing unnecessary extra steps. You could go ahead and set your port. Definitely are going to need that.
On the Docker file?
Oh, right. You could actually do it for either one. So you could either do it for the Docker file or the Docker Compose. In the Docker file, it would be expose. In the Docker Compose, it would be that port mapping. It's generally better practice to have consistency right. So if Docker Compose is kind of like the master mechanism for orchestrating these different applications, it's best to have as much of the visibility on your configurations there. So let's set the port inside of Docker Compose.
And this is for the Flask.
Yep. And so it's going to be port 8000 by default, I believe. And you could change it in the Flask app, but by default, it should be 8000. So you could just map 8000, 8000. There we go. Okay. All right, back to the Docker file. Let's do, yeah, let's go back to oh, right, you have to add Docker file, by the way. So after line 11, you have to specify Docker file and then the name of the Docker file. And inside of your Flask Docker file, let's go ahead and add some setup steps. So you're going to need your requirements.txt inside of the container, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's use copy. The way you have right now is fine. It's because it's going to copy everything inside of your Flask directory to the container. That should work. So after that, let's add a command for installing what's inside of the requirements file.
The pip install requirements.
Yeah, except we're not going to want to do it there. You're going to want to set a run block. So, and go above the command. The difference between run and command is run is what you can use to execute commands while the image is building. And command is the final command that's going to be run after it's finished building.
Okay.
Things like set like pip install requirements, use run, and let's say one common practice for Flask is, well, not even just for Flask, for a lot of applications, is to define an entry point, a shell script, right? So let's do that, even if it's simple. Let's do first, let's create a new file inside of your Flask directory. And let's call it entrypoint.sh. Okay, and here let's do something like exec space.
Like that or like that.
I'll paste it in the Zoom chat. Oh, and we'll also want a shebang at the very top. We haven't talked about shebang since like the very first week.
Yeah.
Yeah, that shebang basically tells Docker how to interpret this shell file, and we want to use bin shell or bash. And yeah, that's good. What this is going to do is it's going to execute that flask run command, and if it fails, it's going to reload, and it's going to run it on its local hosts. So this should be good. Now back in our Docker file, let's call this entry point, and now we could use command. So inside of command, let's do square brackets and double quotations and period / entry point dot shell. Syntax for this is kind of strange, but basically it's like we see that we're using square brackets, so it's like a list, right? It's like an array, and it's like an array of different parameters, different parts of the command line command that's going to be run. For now, this is all we need, so this looks good. Let's save and let's add a database to our Docker Compose. Okay. So here we could actually keep it really simple. Like we could even, instead of build this time, let's just set an image. Let's just call the image directly here. So type image, and we'll grab an official image from Postgres. It's just like how in the Docker file you were pulling Python and a version and then using
Yeah.
Alpine. And let's do, I don't know, version 15. So :15 dash Alpine. Okay. And let's see. We're probably going to want some environment variables for this, right? While, well, it's simple enough that we don't have to like create a subdirectory for it. We're at least going to want to pass in some environment variables like your Postgres username, your Postgres password.
Okay.
So let's type an environment block.
In the compose?
Yeah, in the compose. Sorry, I'll put it under the same indentation as image. So like right below image. Yeah, there you go. And now you can indent one more time, hit enter and then indent one more time. Let's use dashes to set multiple environment variables. And our first one will be all capitals Postgres _ user. And you just need one dash.
Sorry, say that again. There's some commotion outside.
Yeah, you just need one dash. And we're gonna add Postgres _ user equals, let's just do default value. So equals Postgres. And let's do the same for the Postgres password and the Postgres DB.
That.
Yep. Okay. See. All right, and let's also map some ports. So in this case, we can use 5432. Okay. And cool. Let's test this out. I don't know if it's going to work, but let's test it out. Let's go ahead and run your Docker compose command on it.
Say that again. The docker compose command.
Yeah. So inside of your terminal, let's go up one directory. And now we're going to run Docker compose. And you're going to use -f to specify a file name because you gave it a custom file name. So let's do space practice.yaml and let's type up.
Okay.
Yeah, let's try that. I think the up might have to be right after Docker compose. Okay, yeah, I think it does. So let's do Docker compose up. Okay, let's try that. Okay, what is it saying? No such file or directory.
Maybe on the Flask block. I think Jeremy put a Docker, not Docker file on the line 12.
Oh, I see. Good call. Okay. Right, let's save. Let's try again. Valid plugins. That's interesting. Can you scroll up a bit more in the terminal? And let's scroll down a bit until we try it with the dash. Docker compose with the dash.
Dash up.
No, between Docker and compose. It's so weird. Unknown shorthand flag.
I'm getting the same thing.
Okay, I must be. Let me double check something. Oh, yeah, press up a few more times and go back to the command where up was at the very end. So let's try that again. I'm like running it right now on my machine and I don't see what's. Can we scroll up? Delete the dash, maybe.
I ran with the space.
Okay, and it still did that. And is it giving you the same error?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we, let's see. Do an ls. Yeah, delete all of that. Command delete. Do an ls. Okay. What happens if you just do a Docker compose up with no other arguments? Mm, okay. So do a Docker compose dash dash help. I guess you don't have it set up. Okay. You're on a WSL, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you install Docker Desktop in your Ubuntu?
I'm not sure. Thanks.
And I think Flo, did you say you were getting the same error?
I was, and I corrected some stuff in my Docker Compose YAML file.
Okay.
And then I also had ChatGPT correct my errors that I couldn't find, and I managed to run it.
Okay. And are you on Windows or Mac?
I'm on Windows WSL.
Okay. So your Docker Compose is working.
Good question.
Sure.
I missed it, and this is like way back. I was hoping I would see it again if I did it. What is was supposed to be in the engineer's code file?
Sure. Yeah, the Nginx configuration file is basically just going to set details like where to look for the HTML files that it's going to serve, right? And it can also have configurations for where you want to route traffic. So in our use case, a common practice is to have um, anything like front end related going to the root directory, and then anything back end related going to a / API subdirectory, because that way we could route all of the API requests to port 8000 and send it over to Flask. Let's see. I think there might be an example here. Okay, yeah. In this repository, I'm going to send it inside of Zoom. This was the one that I shared last week. This should have an example of like a lot of this stuff. Like it'll have an Nginx directory with a configuration file for reference and some notes on how that works. Yeah, I don't know. Was Reno able to get this set up for you on day 2? Because I know he reached out to me saying he was having some issues.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think last week they just told us, okay, you have this project, do yourself. So nobody gave lessons, just you.
Oh, yikes.
You don't want to say it.
I mean, I told him it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to set up. You're just passing in secrets and then changing a few things inside of the configuration. But We will, I could demo that later on again if need be, or maybe even wait until next week just to give you all a little more experience with Docker Compose first. And let's see. Oh, it looks like you got it running. Let's see. All right, this is good. Container Docker Compose Flask 1 is starting. Aha, yeah. So what do you think that error message is telling you?
Something up here.
Mhm. Which service is it?
Postgres. Oh, mine's different.
Something like this, right? Web service.
You see, yeah. Yeah, what do you think it is?
Need a different port, maybe.
Yes.
Just do a random one, or
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much anything that's not being used. Now on the right, you still want to use port 80.
uh,
On the left is the port inside
uh,
of your actual local machine, right? So that's the one that you could basically set to anything. So when you go to your browser and you type in whatever you need to type in to access your container, that's the port you're going to use. Okay. Do you know why 80 is already in use?
um, no, maybe because I don't know, my machine's talking to the internet.
Exactly. 80 is a default port for HTTP connections. So there's already a listener on your local machine bound to it. That's why in development for Docker Compose, we'll generally use 8080. Cool. And yeah, exactly same thing with Postgres. Now, aha, what do you think is missing here?
I have to add on to the end.
Not quite yet. It's a permission issue.
Oh, environment variables. Oops, yeah, right there.
The hint is that it's happening on your shell script, right?
Yeah, I need to give the password somewhere, like the sudo password.
Not necessarily, but we can modify something else on the file and not exactly in the file, but more so like the file itself.
Add something.
Look inside of your Docker file. Oh, we didn't even add that step. Oh, I thought we did, but we didn't. It's chmod. Remember how like when we
Yeah.
make shell scripts, we almost always have to run chmod plus x or chmod 600 on it. Yeah. Okay. And I think you need to switch the O and the M.
All right.
Okay. Now, I think you'll also still have to do it locally. I'm not 100% sure if you do, but you might. So you could try it again. Okay,
Okay,
I think yeah, it wants you to do it on your local machine first.
sure.
Do you mind clicking on your entry point.sh? Okay, thank you.
Can you remove that final colon? Yeah, let's get rid of that and let's save it. I don't think that's the issue, but why is it still giving permission denied? Is anyone else running into this still?
Not that error. I'm just having an issue with my web page or
Okay.
my database. It says the connection was reset, so it seems like it connected, Docker's up, but something is wrong with my database.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think we got to that part yet. So, Jeremy, do you mind if we switch screens?
Sure.
Cool. All right, Flo, share your screen. Okay.
Can you guys see it okay?
Yep. Let's go over to your Docker Compose. And first, could you expand the terminal so we could see the error message, the exact error message?
I wasn't getting it in here. So I was doing these two commands earlier.
Hmm.
When I would run this one, I would get a little bit more information,
Hmm.
the build instead of the dash D.
Hmm.
Um, so let's see.
The dash
I could
D
just
stands for detached, which is why you get more
mhm,
information when you don't use it.
gotcha. So if I do the build,
Hmm.
then I get more information. Well, I was getting more information.
Okay, this might be where it's probably hanging or something, right?
It wasn't earlier, so that's weird. But um,
Open up another terminal.
okay. Oh, there's some
Oh,
invalid length of startup.
okay. So when you went to your browser and you tried to access it, that's why you're getting a log. Okay, cool. This exact message. Let's scroll down in your Docker Compose file. Let's look at your database configuration and let's add a health check to this.
That would be under, I guess, would it be after the ports?
Yeah, it could be after the ports. I don't think the
It doesn't
order
really matter.
much, yeah. So this health check, let me look for my example. We are going to do a colon. Okay, next line, add test. Indent test. And let's make a list. Make a list of strings of commands. The first one is going to be command dash shell. And sorry, actually, let's use the square brackets instead of dashes.
Up here.
Yeah, just like that. Let's do command cmd dash shell comma. Let's do double quotes. PG underscore is ready. Space dash U for capital U dash capital U.
In the same quotation.
In the same string, yeah.
Gotcha.
And let's add one more space inside of there and add Postgres. Okay. So this is basically sending a command, a test command to Postgres, the Postgres container using the Postgres username. Now in your next line, let's do an interval. And we'll do 5s for 5 seconds. You don't need quotes. Next line, we could do a timeout for the same thing. And next line, let's set the number of retries, and we could set it to 5. 5 should be good. Okay.
I rerun the build command.
Yes.
Okay. Oh no.
It's saying now.
Let's start either by command or command shell or not. Oh, it's case sensitive,
Mhm.
I think. Let's see. Okay.
Cool, cool.
Hmm.
Okay. All right, so that's for port 5432. Let's try port 5000 inside,
Here on the left side.
no, inside of your browser, actually.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay, so, oh, were you using 5000 for Flask or 8000?
I don't remember. Probably 8,000, yeah.
Yeah,
So let's go back. Hmm.
okay, what are the logs saying? Invalid length of startup pack. Is it the same thing?
Yes. Let's go back up. Valid length.
Oh, let's scroll back down. I saw something in the Flask logs. See how it says running on HTTP? Down more, down more. It was like right before the last database. Yeah, for Flask.
Oh, right here.
Yeah, it's
Oh yeah, there it
running
is.
on port 5000. So let's try changing your port from 8000 to 5000. I I might be wrong about 8000 being the default port. 8000 might be the default port if you're using G Unicorn. But then again, I think I'm using, what am I using in this example? Oh, I have it set to both. I see. Okay. Now let's try 5000.
Hey, look at
Nice.
that.
All right. So one service down. Let's try your 8080.
Oh, that's in over here, right?
Mhm. It shouldn't work. Oh, cool. It is working. Nice. All right. So you have two of your services up. Let me think.
So that's web services, class, and then the database.
Yeah. I wouldn't expect you shouldn't be able to access the database through the browser. So let's think of another way to access it. Let's open up another terminal. And in that terminal, do Docker PS.
That's so weird. I did like an update and now my thing looks different, of course.
Oh, or,
Oh man.
or Zeesh. And it's not showing Zeesh.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
No, it should be good, right? Yeah, okay.
Okay. Now let's do a Docker PS. Okay. So can you stretch that window out so we could see it a little more clearly? Okay, cool. So the name of your database container is docker-compose1 database-1. Highlight and copy that name. Okay. Now let's do a Docker space exec dash I. Let's do dash IT. I think it might need to be IT. Um, let's paste that name. It's the name of that container. And then let's add a command. And for that command, let's try period, just period. Okay, hit enter. Okay. Press up, delete the period, and do /bin/bash. Okay. So now you're inside of your Docker container. Or sorry, well, it is a Docker container. Your Docker container for your database. And if you
Hmm.
try to type PSQL for pSQL, let's see what happens. Aha. Okay, do a PSQL with a dash capital U and Postgres. Cool. Looks like your database is running.
Hmm. Very nice.
Nice.
So that's all three services.
Exactly. And yeah, that's pretty much what you're going to be using for the assessment and really even the capstone project. It doesn't need to be like any more crazy or complex than that. Good stuff.
Obviously, we have a pretty bare bones stack.
Hmm.
Um, are we going to be adding stuff throughout the week to this particular stack or?
No, this particular stack is the stack that was covered last week, or supposed to be covered last week. This
Gotcha.
week, let's see, got Docker Compose. Okay, this week is going to be going into more detail for some of these things, right? Like, hold on, sorry. Okay, I thought my dog was choking. Uh, more detail on things like Docker volumes, networks, and on Saturday with Chandra, more practice with combining GitHub Actions workflow with Docker Compose. So really, these next few weeks is just going to be a lot more practice. Shit.
Oh boy.
I got a new dog like last week, and he is so freaking weird. Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, a lot of this week and next week is really just more practice. Um, so you should be, you all should be fine for the assessment. I really don't see anyone, foresee anyone struggling with it. We've covered Docker Compose um, a bit before even introducing it formally, and now we're introducing it formally, so you'll have plenty of time to get more comfortable with it for the assessment. Okay. Let's see. Does anybody else want to continue troubleshooting? Jeremy, did you have any luck getting past your latest error?
Yeah, I got past that error, but then I went back to the permission denied from the entry point. So, I don't know.
That's weird. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm running into it failed to find class application.
Okay.
Let's use app, colon app, specify one.
Okay.
Later.
Your screen. Failed to find. Okay, let's see your. Oh, yeah, let's see your Flask app.py file. Is there, are you missing the if name equals main? I forget what that's called. Oh no, I don't have that either. Let's see. Let me look at your Docker file for the Flask app again. Okay, I see. So you're running that instead of using the entry points. Can you try commenting out the Flask underscore app equals app.py, line 6? Okay, let's try that. Oh, one thing I haven't mentioned yet is for fairly simple builds, this probably shouldn't be an issue. But later on, as you add more complexity, it might be. Um, After you run Docker Compose up and it builds its containers out of the images, you saw how like with Flo's screen, he was typing dash dash build to force it to rebuild each time. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you're going to want to run Docker Compose down to destroy those containers before you rebuild them. And so if you do a Docker Compose down, and yep, what were you running for the Docker Compose up? Oh, okay. Yeah, you have to point to the file name. Well, actually, you shouldn't have to point to the file name because I thought you shouldn't. Okay. So I don't think that's going to solve this particular problem, but I just wanted to throw it out there. That's something else that you might want to try when you're troubleshooting issues, especially weird edge cases. So now you can just rebuild using up. Failed to find Flask application. Let's scroll up a bit. If- Let's see if it said anything else. Or factory and module app. Okay, let's look at your requirements.txt. Use app name is specified. Yep, Flask. And back to your Docker file. I wonder if it's
Everything in the right folder. Flask, these things. Web services, these two. This is outside of all, but inside of the Docker.
yeah, that looks good. Can we look at your Docker Compose? Were you getting any errors for the web service? Because I see you're using port 80.
Oh, look. Hold up, it's not. Uh, this was made for what, 8,000?
I mean, I'm just wondering why it didn't return an error. Because that returned an error for Jeremy.
Yeah.
So the web server doesn't actually ever completely set up right. Like it's starting processes over and over, but it doesn't actually show any sign of. For Flask, why are you using port 8080 on the right?
Here?
Yeah, on the right side, on the container side.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, let's
I
try.
was trying to keep up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's try 8,000 because I think it's either 8,000 or 5,000. One of those are going to be the default ports for
We
Flask.
used 5,000.
Okay, 5,000.
Here?
Yeah, 5,000. And on the left, yeah, you'll want to change that to 5,000, yes. The number on the left-hand side is the port on your local machine. That's essentially the port you're going to use to access the container. 8080 is good for the web service because 80 is already going to be used by your browser. So on the right, though, you want to leave it as 80.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
whatever.
All right, let me try again. So Nginx utilizes port 80 as a default port for HTTP connections because that is a default port for HTTP connections. Because of that same reason, on your local machine, port 80 is already being used. Your local machine is already listening on port 80 for activity because when you go to your browser and you type anything in the URL bar, it's actually using port 80 by default. That's why we changed the port on the left-hand side to anything else other than 80. 8080 just kind of became the number of choice because it's really arbitrary. As long as it's a port that's not being used already, it's easier to remember 8080 is what you want to use to connect to port 80 inside of the container. That's really probably the only reason why. And for Flask, yes, Lamar.
Um, so I was just thinking about what you were saying. So when we're on AWS and we spin up an EC2 instance and we utilize Apache to listen on port 80, technically wouldn't that EC2 instance be listening on port 80 already? Because if we have a internet gateway connected, right, and we can connect to the internet, it should be listening on 80. So why then does Apache still work and you can still serve your static files through Apache through port 80? Like for example, like when for this, what we did today, I did 8080 and mine works fine because I'm using Apache
Interesting. That's
front
got to
end for.
be, yeah, that's just got to be like a difference between Apache and Nginx.
Okay.
I don't know the exact specifics. I've only really used Apache in the few example projects that we've had. I don't have too much more experience with it than that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was just kind of curious because some of the assessments we used Apache.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, but for today, I just used Nginx and then um, I even proxied with Nginx to the back end. So um, anyway.
Okay, I think let's go back to your Docker file because it looks like it's happening during the Flask run command. Flask run. Maybe you're just missing exec. In front of Flask, inside of command in line 9, can you try typing exec, also in double quotes, and then a comma afterwards? Mm. Can you do a Docker compose down first and then a Docker compose up? Okay, let's ask either Google or Chat GPT. I don't think I've ever seen that error.
So I did, and that's where you still sure. I don't know if you guys heard him crying back.
Nope. You must have good noise canceling.
Do I have to maybe in this portion, but uh, well, that's because that's his return app. This one doesn't return the app, just returns color with it. So return app year two.
Sorry, you're kind of breaking up. One thing I did notice though, if we go back to your Docker file, You're doing Flask app equals app.py colon app.
Well, I just did that. Should I have?
Well, I mean, I don't even have that, so I don't know. I'm not setting that in mine.
Oh, okay. I think I see it. Okay, hold on. I think I see differences between in there. So they have some sort of functions.
What was it? Oh, did we just not see that? Well, actually, I don't have that either. Mine is just app equals Flask underscore.
I don't know if that's gonna work. I'd be darned if I didn't try.
Why didn't the entry point .sh work?
I don't know. I got the same error for that one too.
Oh, really? Can we look
Yeah,
at
I had to
can we look at the entry point .sh real quick?
take this part.
Oh, you have to. I just wanted to see it first. Well, yeah, we could leave it like that for now, so we could try it. So yeah, let's look at the entry point .sh. Okay, you have your shebang. You've got that looks good to me. Well, class. And it was giving you the same error, huh? Your folder
I
is
have made several changes since. So
okay. You Docker compose down one more time. And then do an ls.
Does that forward slash change anything? It's not just a period
my
under
work
work
directory.
order.
That's going to set the work directory inside of the. Oh, that's a good point, though. It might be setting, right, it's setting the working directory to the root of the container.
No, it just looked like you just have the error. And yeah, it's good.
I don't know if that's exactly an issue because regardless of wherever you set it, it's gonna copy everything inside of your Flask underscore app directory locally into that directory in the container, and it should be running all of the commands from that directory. So it should work regardless of where you set it.
But I did say that. And
When you do a build, when you do up, can you do a dash dash build afterwards? So Docker compose down will stop the containers, but Docker, it doesn't necessarily like rebuild the containers from the images, right? So next time you run Docker compose up, it might be running an older version before you even made those changes, right? That's why using dash dash build um, can help troubleshoot certain issues. It will ensure that it's going to rebuild the containers from the latest version, from your latest changes. And another way to delete volumes is when you do your Docker compose down, if you do a dash V, it will also remove all of the volumes and networks related to that compose file.
So should I try this with or without the dashboard?
I'll leave it with a dash build for now, yes.
Perfect. That
Did it work? Can't tell.
looks great.
Yeah, let's look inside your browser.
And
Okay. Let's try
what
port.
was it? 5,000?
Not cool.
What was the command?
Oh,
Dash the
Aisa.
the last command that you told her to run.
Okay. Well, I was saying if you wanted to delete volumes when you do your Docker compose down, you could do Docker compose down dash V, and that's going to
Oh,
remove the networks and the volumes as well. And
okay.
you do Docker compose up again. If you do a dash dash build, now that's going to make sure that it builds the latest, includes the latest changes in the container that it builds from the image, that runs from the image.
Got
Okay, let's go ahead, take a break. I'm going to open up breakout rooms. The challenge for today is really more, well, more Docker Compose stuff. Not much of a surprise there, but try to go through it, and we will have a quick stand down at 9 o'clock. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. See y'all.
Cool.